I've always been a misfit. When my life began, I was Japanese. For 12 hours, until the sergeant came in the room and stamped my birth certificate as a product of the US Navy. This was my life. This was the precedent that was set for me when my life began as what was true about the world. And boy, there were some amazing things true about that world. But just as this notion of this being my life began to set in, I was sort of ripped from this place and brought here. The rolling hills of the previously undeveloped San Diego, California, where I learned about hiking and I learned about nature and started a new chapter in my life. And what gave me peace in that time was the fact that this was what I was eating. So again, back to this beautiful, colorful, healthy thing, this consistent thread. As soon as I started getting comfortable in this place, yet again ripped away and brought to this place. This alien landscape of massive things. This is one of several specimens of the overleaf intersections in Dallas, Texas that you might be familiar with. And in this place I learned about what's possible when you think big and you've got a lot of space to work in. And even in a place like this, I was able to make peace with what was going on because, well, look what we got to eat. Amazing, amazing. This was real for me. This was like, all right, I'm starting to get in the groove here. I'm kind of liking this. And then, yes, once again, I get ripped from this place and end up here. If you recognize this image, anyone know the year? 78, blizzard of 78. We arrived in this little town in northern New England 1 month after the storm came through and pretty much ripped up everything. So that was the first thing, like, wait a minute. This doesn't sort of fit in my worldview. And then I found out what they ate. Every meal seemed to be just stripped through the process of boiling for hours, every bit of color and flavor. And I'm like, oh, this is not gonna do. When we're traveling and being in all these places in the world, started to adapt kind of a big worldview, being in all these different locations, and maybe even adapted a few progressive ideas about the way the world worked. In fact, we arrived in this little New England town in this bus with a thick Texas accent and some pretty wild ideas about what was possible in the world. And we're confronted by people like this who had some pretty particular notions about how the world worked that had been around for some time, a couple 400 years or so. This was the moment when I realized I didn't fit. Meaning my worldview, my ideas about the world, literally didn't fit into what I was being presented with. My father was an electronic engineer, and growing up with someone like that, I learned a lot about the way the world worked, meaning the science of things. And we didn't have a lot of money, so if we wanted anything in our house that was to do with technology, we needed to go to the dump, find something, bring it home, and fix it. So often he and I would be spending endless hours in the basement blowing stuff up and trying to make things work. This is a teletype, actually, he and I painstakingly rebuilt from World War II, which really taught me about how mechanical things work and electronic things work. My mom taught me shit. If we wanted to eat well, we were going to have to make it ourselves. And so began the process of learning how to create. And a big part of that was figuring out how to cajole the earth into producing things that were edible and delicious and healthy. And so a lot of time was spent in the dirty art of creating things. And when we weren't doing that, we were busy negotiating with our neighbors, where we would be trading things for hides and sheep wool, and we would be carding and weaving and creating things that out of thin air that never existed. So in this time, I learned a couple of truths that I still hold today. The first one is if you want to work with what exists, you have to know how it works. You have to put in the time to understand the mechanics, the vocabulary, the semantics, all of the things of how things are if you want to work in that place. And then the other thing is this notion that seems so simple, but I think we tend to forget sometimes. If there's something that doesn't exist that's needed, just make it. Don't wait for it. Bring it into existence. My apprenticeship as a misfit continued all through my high school career, where I studied art and I studied physics. And then on into college, I studied ceramic sculpture and astronomy. I was straddling between two worlds. I was always standing in the world that is, in the deep fascination with science and the real physical ideas about what's true in the world, but also in this space where I was actively conjuring into existence things that had never been there before. And over time, I began to move between these spaces and be able to navigate between these spaces. And it was really hard because I never quite fit. I was never able to be in a place that I felt like I was part of something. And being a misfit isn't easy. When I was a kid, being in that little town with a Texas accent with kind of liberal views about the world and a taste for nice gourmet food, the only friend I had was the only black kid in 3 towns who happened to be adopted. And he and I were best friends. And so that story went on and on. And so it called into question this idea of, well, why? Why am I obsessed with this idea of what is and what could be? Why do I make it a choice that I will be perpetually dissatisfied with the status quo? Why am I not interested in fitting in with what everyone else is doing? What possesses me to choose this way of being in the world that has me call into question always what could be made possible, and never be satisfied? It wasn't until I met my mentor that I understood that I wasn't alone, and that there were some questions that if I could find answers to might help me understand what was the driving force behind this. And the first question was, well, there's got to be something that's driving this way of being. And one of the things that happened was the notion of this question, that it was even useful to contemplate, started me on an inquiry to say, well, what is it? What is it that has me be this way? What is it that has me obsessed about bringing into existence new things? What is it that has me take this stand? And it was the discovery of this purpose, what I was here to do, that started to begin to make things clearer for me, and started to allow me to understand more dimensions about my life. And one of those dimensions is, if I understood what I'm here for, then I can start to paint a picture of what my future might be like. I can start to use my imagination to build a narrative without any connection to what's real right now, but just free from all that, and to explore openly what I could see as possible for my own future, and create a picture and a story that I could hold. And in that, and having a sense of purpose, and having this sense of the future that I so desperately wanted, I was able to examine something else, which is what is true for me now, and look at it through the lens of 3 dimensions of what's true for me now, what is really going on, and in light of my purpose, in light of my future, gave me a way to look at what was real for me. It gave me an opportunity to make some choices. There's no lack of things we can do with our lives. So what do we choose? How do we get decisive about what actions we take, what changes we make? One of the things I discovered when I started examining what was true for me is how unbelievably inadequate so much of what was true was going on. I also saw that there were some fundamental things in my life that were true, that were brilliant and wonderful, like my children and my family. That was a beautiful truth. Some of those truths that were inadequate, I also discovered were self-created. They were things that were true that perpetuated me staying in that truth. They weren't letting me go. And having a sense of future and having a sense of purpose allowed me to confront those things and say, you know what? I can look at them for what they are. I am what's creating that truth and keeping it alive, that's keeping me in this place, because maybe this place is comfortable and safe. And so having this inquiry allowed me to see and make some changes, and boy, did I make some changes. I literally looked at my life and recalibrated every single relationship I had to see, is this in service to my future? Am I in this relationship in a way that's going to bring my future into existence? Am I in these relationships in a way that is an expression of my commitment to my own purpose, my own reason for being? It had me confront things I was putting on the shelf, was either suppressing or in denial of, that I needed to address and commit to address if I was absolutely serious about what I said I was out for. And what I had now, which I never had before, is a framework to understand and how to make those decisions, which was amazingly powerful. It drove me to do some pretty crazy things. So 4 years ago, I was 265 pounds. I had a heart condition. I had heart surgery. I went from that state to a state of running the Boston Marathon and now running ultra marathons pretty regularly in a year. Not because I ever wanted to be a runner. I was never an athlete my whole life. I never knew what that was like. But I knew this. I knew if I was serious about my commitment to my purpose, that if I didn't take care of myself, my body, mind, and spirit, how could I possibly be responsible for my commitments? How can I possibly look myself in the face and say, am I really setting myself up for success? Am I really putting myself in a position where I can own what I said I was out for? Can I own my own potential? So taking on things like this, confronting a marriage that wasn't working, and getting it to a state where it was, which means we are no longer married, and we're both much better off for it. Life choices, it all came clear for me. What's interesting is that this idea of these ways of looking at our lives became pretty useful for other people too. So through my experience of sort of uncovering this way of looking at life, I started bringing it out through my business to individuals and organizations. And it started to change things in a pretty big way for a lot of people. For businesses, we're all in the AEC space, for example, and the longer you've sort of been in that business, the more often you're living in that one dimension of what's true. What's that truth? And for a lot of us in this space, that truth is ship and win. And ship and win, and ship and win. And it's about how to compete and how to thrive in what is. What are these parameters, this paradigm of the AEC industry that all of us are trying with different ways and means to be more successful, being competitive inside of, being more satisfied, doing better work inside of? And this dimension of the reality of shipping and winning and proposals and the absurdity of all these things that we're doing are a result of the water around us being the only reality we see is possible. It's incredibly attractive to stay in this reality because this reality we know how to be in. We know how to do what's true for us, right? We do it every day. It's in your email. It's on your calendar. It's all there waiting for you to do. How many pitch proposals need to go out the door tomorrow, right? It's all waiting to happen. And so it becomes a single-dimensional way to think about our lives. We know how to do it. There's language for it. All those things. When we step into a second dimension of what's possible, we begin to use our imaginations and conjure up an image of what could be. And if we can think through these two dimensions, now all of a sudden our world opens up to have choices we didn't imagine we could have. Meaning we could meet the demands of our day and take care of the what's true for us, but we could also do it in a way that starts to create conditions where we can be successful in our future lives. Funny thing about that second dimension, though, is the minute, for example, if you're thinking about your future right now, that will collapse under the weight of your email the minute you check your phone and leave this session today. It crushes under the weight of what's true for us every time. So what does it take to keep that dimension open? What does it take to allow us to continue to keep our dream alive under the crushing weight of meeting the demands of the day and the grocery shopping and the kids and all that stuff? Purpose. That third dimension is the thing that allows us to see something that's so compelling, so evocative, so gravity so strong that it allows us to be willing to keep all of these dimensions open at once. As a consequence of that, what happens if we can keep those three dimensions open is, quite simply, the organizations that are able to do it and the individuals that are able to do it, they are able to have a say and absolutely design and live into a future of their own creation. Not an existence of reacting to whatever the world throws at you, but an existence of creativity and passion and in the empowerment and the notion that you can have your future any way you want it if you're willing to create it. The world's not going to provide you what you need. It's not laying around waiting for you to come and find it. You have to bring it into existence. And if you do, you can have whatever kind of future you want to have. Thank you.